So this video is all about giving that overview. This is the Syrian war mapped. The war in Syria didn't start out of nowhere. When you look at Syria on a map, it is important to understand that it is positioned in the center point of very different cultures. The Mediterranean Sea area, Egypt, Anatolia, today Turkey, the Mesopotamia region, as well as the Persian land on the east and Arab in the south, from which the religion of Islam spread in the 7th century. Throughout its history, Syria has been controlled and influenced by very different powers. Its capital, Damascus, is often listed as the oldest continuously inhabited city on the entire planet. Early mentions of the city go back to 1500 before Christ. Because of its strategically advantageous location, sheltered by mountains and supplied with water by the Barada River, it became the capital of the huge Islamic empire ruled by the Umayyad in the 7th century. Today, even if it is mostly controlled by the government, there is a war in the historic city. A war that is now in its 6th year and is more complex than ever before. How did this happen? After the First World War, France and Great Britain redraw the lines in the Middle East. Syria was controlled by France, combining many different ethnic and religious groups into one country. In today's Syria, 90% of the population are Arabs, 9% are Kurds in the northern regions. And in the two biggest cities of Aleppo and Damascus, there's a larger Armenian population as well. Most of the citizens are Muslims, although there are also larger Christian and Druze populations. 70% of Muslim population in Syria is being Sunni, 3% being Shia, and 13% being Alevis, who separated from Shia and are despised among Sunni and Shia populations. However, the current government is ruled by an Alevis family under President Bashar al-Assad. The country has experienced a steady economic growth since the 1990s, from which half of the GDP comes from agriculture and oil. But the gap between big economic centers of the country and smaller, mostly Sunni and Shia regions has been growing as well. And so those were the regions in which people started protesting in 2011. Inspired by similar movements in Tunisia, Egypt and Yemen, the people in Daraa went on the streets and demanded the end of the Assad regime. The protests soon expanded to more cities and were brutally fought by the government. Since then, a lot has changed in the war, and Syria turned into an immense humanitarian catastrophe. So let's look at who is fighting who. Note that this video is made mid-October 2016. Essentially, there are 4 different militant groups fighting each other: the Syrian government, opposition groups, the so-called Islamic State, and the Kurdish Rojava. The Syrian government under President Assad controls most of western Syria as well as the entire coastline. It is in direct combat with the rebels, several civil opposition groups that are commonly described as the Free Syrian Army. Their goal is to overthrow Assad. But after 2012, the Free Syrian Army split up into several, in some cases very opposing groups, from the Al-Nusra Front, which are radical Islamists similar to the Islamic State, to the new Syrian army under the National Syrian Coalition, a group trained by the CIA fighting against the so-called Islamic State. The Islamic State is a terror organization which originated from Al-Qaeda. The so-called IS controls a large part of the region around the Euphrates River, as well as a few bigger cities, most prominently its de facto capital, Al-Raqqa. Civilians who live in areas taken over by IS are suppressed by terror, lack basic human rights, and have no other option than to join the Islamist radical ideology. The northern part of Syria is controlled by the Kurdish Rojava. During the course of the civil war, the Assad government withdrew from this region, and since then, local Kurdish militias kept control and fought against the so-called IS and against opposition groups. Rojava has its own constitution, including equal gender rights as well as religious freedom, and it is designed to work as an autonomous region in a potential future unified Syria. Relations between Rojava and the Assad government are pragmatic. Both states are not a threat to the existence of the other. However, there also have been fights between the YPG, whichever's armed forces, and pro-Assad troops. One of the reasons this conflict has become so complicated is because many global interests are at stake as well. Relations between Syria and its big neighbor, Turkey, have been tense for quite a while. Reasons for that being Syria's support of the Kurdish PKK, as well as a dispute over several Turkish dams which reduce the flow of water through the Euphrates River. During the war, Turkey has been supporting opposition groups and is strongly pushing against autonomous rights for Rojava. The autonomous Kurdish regions of Rojava, however, enjoy a broader global support. The even bigger conflict here is one between the United Nations veto powers, in which two groups have separated, a Western and an Eastern group. The Western coalition is led by the United States and supports the rebels in their fight to get rid of Assad. Russia and China, however, are strong supporters of the Assad government, with Russia actively involved in the war, securing Assad's power and bombing the rebels. The war has turned into a humanitarian catastrophe. The war has led to over 4.8 million people fleeing their country as refugees, as well as 6.6 million people displaced inside Syria. And since its outbreak in 2011, roughly 500,000 people were killed.
What is going on in Syria? Well, it's all pretty straightforward. Turkey is attacking ISIS, despite being widely accused of secretly helping the group for years. Turkey is also fighting Kurdish YPG fighters at the same time, even though the YPG are battling ISIS. America is helping the Syrian Kurds, even though the Kurds' sworn enemy Turkey is America's main NATO ally in the region. Russia started arming the Kurds after the Turkish military downed a Russian jet, and after a long truce, Kurdish fighters have now started attacking Assad's forces. So the Kurds could be using Russian weapons to attack Russia's main ally. Moscow says it is bombing ISIS, but analysts say the usual targets are other Sunni rebels, some backed by America and Britain. In Syria, the US and UK say they support secular fighters, while also backing Sunni groups, against the Alawite Assad regime backed by Shia Iran and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. In neighbouring Iraq, it's the other way around. Western governments support the Shia-dominated government against Sunni insurgents. So they're on the same side as Iran in Iraq, but on the other side in Syria. In Aleppo, moderate rebels, supported by America, are fighting alongside a group known until recently as the Al-Nusra Front, Islamists who used to be affiliated to Al-Qaeda, the sworn enemy of America. Qatar and Saudi Arabia are accused of having funded the Al-Nusra Front too, despite their long alliance with the US. Gulf states strongly deny financing ISIS, who are fighting Al-Nusra too. Russia and Iran are on Assad's side, but have fallen out over Russia's use of Iranian air bases, while America and Britain are against Assad, but never actually attack his forces. And of course, Assad is the sworn enemy of ISIS, while allegedly buying oil from the terror group. What started as a popular revolution against the dictator has turned into a conflict engulfing the entire region.
The attack on Asharat airbase was launched from 2 U.S. warships in the Mediterranean Sea. Syrian authorities say 5 people have been killed and 7 others wounded in the strike. They say the attack caused civilian casualties in villages near the airbase. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, the strike almost destroyed the base. Pentagon says Washington had warned Moscow ahead of the attack to minimize risk to Russian personnel located at the airfield. U.S. defense officials say the attack was a one-off, meaning it was expected to be a single strike with no current plans for escalation. U.S. President Donald Trump says the strike was in response to what he calls the Syrian government's recent chemical attack in Idlib province.
And we are coming on the air right now because we're about to hear from President Trump down in Mar-a-Lago, about to speak on that military strike he has ordered against Syria, 50 Tomahawk cruise missiles in retaliation for that chemical weapons attack by the Assad regime on Tuesday that killed more than 80 people.
I want to stress that the recent reports on the Syrian chemical attack are falsified by the notorious White Helmets organization and the equally infamous Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, headquartered in London. Both of them have lost credibility over forgeries of videos and news, which were all proven untrustworthy by the subjects in question later on. We have grown used to the unfounded allegations against and the unjust criticism of the Syrian government. We know there is only one purpose behind all these actions, that is to overthrow the legitimate government of Syria, and if failing to do so, at least they will put on a political show to manipulate Russia into a veto at the UN.
The Syrian Observatory is not located on the ground, but is based in London. They have access to a good network in Syria, but not everything which is reported there appears to be as they say. I mean, the observatory should take into consideration that there are parties with certain interests which report some things in the way they want it to be reported.
You have to ask the basic question, what would be the motivation of Assad, particularly at this moment in time when he is making great victories, sweeping across Syria in the fight against the rebels? What would be the motivation at this particular time to attract the condemnation of the world's community by carrying out this kind of attack, which actually also, I would say from a military perspective, is of very little military advantage? What would be the motivation? And the people who benefit, of course, from this kind of attack are the rebels themselves, because they gain a major political advantage at a time when they are struggling both strategically and geopolitically. What we need, of course, is an independent investigation, and that would establish the facts from the ground and would be able to make a definitive conclusion.
Syrian authorities have called U.S. strike on a Syrian airbase an act of aggression, adding the attack caused great losses for the country. In addition, the governor of Homs said the U.S. attack will not prevent the Syrian government from fighting terrorism.
This attack will not prevent us from continuing fighting terrorism. We're not surprised to see America and Israel supporting this terrorism. It's a real partner to hit the infrastructure in Syria and the Syrian people, and targeted in many means. It is a practice by the aggression that targeted Syria more than once and in more than one place. We in Syria, leadership, army and people, we chose to face the aggression in all its types, and we know from the beginning that this conspiracy against Syria has means, and that Al-Nusra and others are means of America and Israel and some Arab regimes. We will not be surprised today to see the supporting parties interfering directly after the failure of terrorists in targeting Syria, its strength and army. We will not be surprised to see that Americans playing a direct role on the ground to support its means everywhere.
Iran has categorically condemned the United States' deadly missile strikes on a Syrian airbase. Foreign Ministry spokesman Bahram Qasemi said such unilateral moves are, quote, dangerous, destructive and against international law. He said carrying out missile attacks under the pretext that Damascus used chemical weapons will only strengthen terrorists and further complicate the situation in Syria.
Here we go. Seconds ago, Putin issued a warning to Trump that will have devastating consequences on humanity. George Sandeman for The Sun reports that Russia and Iran have said they will respond. They will respond to further American military actions following the recent airstrike in Syria. The statement was made jointly at the command center for both countries and allied groups. They said, we will respond to any aggression. Okay? Now, future aggression, Doesn't sound like they're going to do anything now, but if we do it again, something happens, we act, they're gonna act out. I don't know what that means. Iran has said, well, maybe we'll hit Israel. That's what some have believed would happen. But according to the statement, what America waged in an aggression on Syria is a crossing of red lines. From now on, we will respond with force to any aggressor or any breach of red lines from whoever it is, and America knows our ability to respond well. So, Iran making this joint statement with Putin. The question is, we know Iran has been launching ballistic missiles. We know they have said they wish to wipe Israel off of the planet. So if there is an action that takes place again in Syria, could they launch a ballistic missile into Israel as a form of retaliation to hit one of our allies? I think it's highly possible and highly, highly dangerous as far as the escalation of tensions in that region. I mean, we're talking about then Israel's going to feel the need to respond, and then it just could blow this thing all out of proportion. So let's just hope and pray that calm heads prevail and that this thing de-escalates and the situation in Syria doesn't boil over. But they're issuing this joint statement now. Quite terrifying.